man. Well, let's get this thing rolling.
Right.
So I guess welcome, man. Welcome to the fifth episode of the coldest side of the pillow. Glad to have you here. Thanks for joining. I know it's kind of last minute or short. I guess we can call it last minute or short notice rather. But want to welcome my good buddy, my good friend. Known him for quite some time now. We'll get into kind of how we met. But my good buddy Sly Onyia, lawyer, father, man of the law. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be, on this podcast to kind of share a little bit of my backstory and how we met and a lot of the similarities we have. And although it is last minute, I couldn't say no. So I
Yeah,
appreciate you having me on here.
yeah. Try to get some of these episodes going and try to get one little bit exposure for everybody, right? And we'll talk about exposure a little bit here in a bit, but yeah, I was actually thinking about this the other day, and when I think about timing, I guess I've known you for shoot, man, 11 years now. Was it 11, 10, 11 years?
It's at
You were
least 11,
at
probably
least 11.
12. Yeah.
Yeah. So
12.
like I think about timing, I was like, man, it's kind of flown by, back in the days in New Mexico. I think the first day we actually met, or at least a vivid memory of when we met for me was when we met at, I think it was Coldstone in Albuquerque. We we just all, me, you, our wives met in the front of Coldstone on Central Avenue, and you and I kind of hit it off talking about law, and at one point I had a goal, or at least I did get accepted into law school, but ended up going a different route. But you stuck to it. You stuck to that route of law school. So kind of want to spend some time on kind of like what that journey's been from, applying to law school, getting into law school, and then we'll talk a little bit about what you're doing today, and and then kind of go from there. Talk about your world in law, what it looks like, and then I know you're not specifically doing business, but obviously I got a business background, so maybe we'll talk about what it looks like to be a business owner and an owner and head lawyer of your own law firm, which ultimately is a business, right? So, I guess we'll start there. Tell the world a little bit about your kind of journey of applying to law school, getting into law school, all that stuff, and then kind of ultimately I guess we can talk about the bar, what that was like, because you took the UBE, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And for folks who don't know what the UBE stands for, that's Uniform Bar Examination, and it's offered in several states here in America. You just, in a nutshell, you're applying to have admission to practice law in a particular state. If you score high enough, you can transfer that score to another state. And every state has their own little special rules and transferring your license and whatnot. So, but yeah, enough of that. Again, I appreciate you having me on this show. I think between the two of us, I think you were the smarter one here by not choosing to go to law school.
I've heard that. I once had a one of my he was a coach in high school. He was actually, when he was coaching in high school for me when I was in high school, he was actually he was in law school at the time, and he ended up writing. I think I met with him a couple times. He was when he finished law school, and when I started trying to get a couple letters of recommendation, he was working for the ACLU in Albuquerque, and I remember vividly. You're not the first person who's ever said that, but I remember vividly he wrote my letter of recommendation. And for those of who don't know, when you go through that law school admissions process, you request letters of recommendation and you hope that you get them. You can't see what's written about you or anything like that. But I remember he wrote a letter of recommendation, and I got accepted. I think into three schools at the time, and I had actually gotten my first promotion when I was working at Kroger or Smith's, the Smith's division of Kroger. I got my first promotion, and at the same time, I got accepted into law school. So I was kind of I was torn between what I needed to do. And at that point, I think I had three kids. I did not think. I know that I had three kids, and I remember he called me and he said, "Hey, did you get in?" He's like, "Don't do it, don't do it." And I was like, Leon, you wrote me a letter of recommendation. You helped me get accepted. What do you mean, don't do it? And he was like, you don't make a lot of money coming out. You don't make it till the end of the year, the end of your career, and all this other stuff. He's like, don't go to law school. It's too saturated, so on and so forth, right? And obviously, this was in 2015 because that's when I had moved to Salt Lake City. So yeah, I remember him calling me. So you're definitely not the first person to say that. So I'm gonna let you finish that thought. I'm gonna let you finish that thought.
Yeah. No, he wasn't. He didn't give you bad advice on the turnaround there. So I mean, listen, a lot of us, I think we have this impression of you go into law school to portray what you see on the media, which is sometimes Law and Order, these big fancy shows like Suits, and, you start thinking, okay, that's the life of a lawyer. You don't realize it's not very much so like that. But to just backdate on why I chose to do law, my parents went through a very nasty divorce when I was younger, and I saw how that affected not just myself, but my four other siblings at the time. And I remember my dad always telling me at that point, like, you got to do something with, the justice system. You're learning something every time. We actually, looking back at it, it was somewhat traumatic. I was a little bit older, but my dad would take me in the court proceedings against my mom, and he would ask me right after we got out of court, "Did you learn anything?" And at the time, as a teenager, I was thinking, like, what did I need to learn? Like, I'm watching my parents fight for custody and bringing up some really nasty allegations in the midst of it, to say the very least. But then I thought further on, and I did my undergrad at University of New Mexico. That's still at that time, you're young, you're stupid, you're not really thinking what you want to do with your life. I did want to go into med school at some point early on in my undergrad, but I wasn't good with math, and science was dry to me. So, I bounced around career options, and it was one day I said, you know what? I'd met my girlfriend at the time, wife now. I had told her, hey, I want to be a lawyer. I'm actually looking into studying the LSAT. For our viewers there and our listeners, the LSAT is the law school entrance exam. Um, and she told me I could do it. I even, at that point, I didn't believe in myself. I just thought it was just a kind of an idea. And let me try it out. Long story short, I took the LSAT twice. I scored high enough to get into a few schools. Based on my LSAT score, I was not the ideal special candidate, but I will say one thing that stood out to me was there's a lot of politics going into law school before you even get in. And LSAT score is just one determining factor if you're even worthy. Okay. The second one that they don't talk about is your grades is common factor, your letter recommendations, that's all great. But there's three criterias that rank a law school. The average LSAT score of the people that are coming in, being admitted, the law school volume of their law library. Okay. Don't ask me why. And then three, the amount of incoming students that are, going into the law school. I didn't find that out till I was in law school and I was having a conversation with my colleagues at the time. But I did volunteer before I said, you know what, I don't know if I want to do this and I don't want to invest so much time and money into it. I did volunteer at the University of New Mexico School of Law, at the Innocence and Justice Project. I did that for about a year before getting into law school. And I did apply to UNM. I did everything I could. I actually wanted to just stay in New Mexico at the time and just make it easy as a transition for myself. My wife's from there. I had already been living there for about 7 years. Um, and, you know, I had some relatives, close relatives that lived there. So I didn't get in, which was a shocker to me. Um, but it was a sign to see how determined I was, right? Could have just reapplied next year and whatnot. So I used that opportunity to go to University of North Dakota, one of the schools I had gotten an exception accepted to. I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship as well, a partial scholarship my first year there. One thing I learned quick in law school is you are going to be on days where you're not ever going to feel prepared for class. And you're going to have clicks right away. It's almost like high school, middle school, re-over, right? And I think you're going to find a classmate or two that you're going to become very good friends with. The library was my go-to spot. I at that time when I came into law school, I had one kid and I was married. My wife and I we uprooted from New Mexico a week before I started law school, or 2 weeks before. We had gotten married like a week before. We had to move across the country to this journey that we weren't too sure about, never been or never lived in the Midwest, but we gave it a try. And sure enough, it was a rough transition, but I would say, you know, that first year it's a killer. You know, we have the saying, first year, you know, they scare you to death. Second year, they work you to death. And the third year of law school, they bore you to death. So first year, I was on the verge of just quitting. There was a lot of depression that I went through. The dean did come into the class one day and just announced that do not be surprised if one third of you who are married end up in a divorce by the end of the school year. Sure enough, I would count about 10 of my classmates got a divorce. It's
That's deep.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think it's because of the internal pressure and external pressure of going to law school. It's a lot. And you're constantly being compared to what your classmates are doing. And it's gritty. You get one exam, okay? For the people that don't know and the people that think about going to law school, um, here's how it goes. You get one exam. Okay, it's not like certain grad schools or undergrads. You get a midterm and quizzes here. You get one chance, and that's the final exam. And I don't know why they call it a final exam. It's the only exam. And in a traditional law school setting, is that exam at the end of the year or the end of semester is your whole grade. So it's not. It doesn't matter if you were understanding the material all along. If you have a bad day the morning of the exam, you're sick, you have an anxiety, or just feel like, oh my gosh, well, good luck, right? And that's where the bell curve comes in. And classes traditionally they are not supposed to give out a certain amount of A's, certain amount of B's, or else there's nothing to grade you on your um on the curve, and in other words, have like a class rank, right? No matter how easy the exam may be, which they normally aren't, they're pretty hard, and you don't even know what's going to be on the exam. It could be, it could be this issue, could be that issue. Um, so I would say this, looking back at it, law school didn't teach me much. It didn't prepare me for the bar exam. There was classes I did extremely well in, and I was lost during the bar exam. The bar exam is a different beast. And for the people that think that law school is something that you just show up and you do your work and you'll be all right, That's not necessarily so. It teaches you how to handle pressure. I think the one thing similar about law school with the actual practice of law, the one thing I could say that's similar is, are you okay being under pressure? And there's pressure for any type of profession and job, but essentially that's what you're doing. And essentially, you got to be okay with having that type of anxiety. If you do have anxiety, not knowing, you got a good case, but the judge still may rule however he or she feels. You might still understand the material, but if so and so had a little extra detail or their, you know, punctuation was perfect, that's the difference between you getting a B versus getting an A minus, right? And so again, there's a lot of nitpicky stuff, and you're dealing with your adversary. So I've been practicing for almost 5 years now, and one thing I would say, obviously, I'm a non-traditional student. By the time I got out of law school, I had 3 kids. I went into law school with a kid. We were making babies each year, which I don't know what we were thinking, but you know what? Worked 3 jobs throughout law school, and I was able to uh, do what we could do during that time. And, I don't regret it one bit. Now, you do come out of law school, and networking has to be your best friend. Now, I know a lot of people go in law school for the wrong reasons, like I mentioned earlier, and then they get a reality check. Maybe you might not be in that fancy suit or that big oval office room, as your day job. But you got to start from somewhere. And I think law school, you have to truly want it, and you have to be okay with working on the weekends. You have to be okay with working overnights. You have to be okay with last minute deadlines. And like, if you want a regular 9 to 5 where you can punch in and punch out and not worry about not working on normal hours, don't be a lawyer. It's not, it doesn't matter what field of law you get into, it's not meant for you. So my little takeaway from taking the bar exam multiple times. I didn't pass it the first time. I didn't pass it the second time. Okay. I took it a few times. And one thing I would say, there's a lot of a cultural bias with that exam, just like a lot of standardized exams. Um, by the time I passed the exam, the saying a weight was lifted over my shoulders is an understatement. I just, it was just something that you have to see to believe, right? I don't take it for
Mm.
granted. I know I worked my butt off to get to that point, right, in my journey. Um, but I wasn't satisfied, right? It was a high. It's like, you know, going on a vacation for the first few days. It feels fun. And then, vacation time runs up after 10 days, right? There's been studies on that, or buying a really fancy car. Like, you're on a high for the first 6 months or a few months, and then you're like, I don't know. It feels good, but it doesn't feel the same. So I had to challenge myself more. And at the time, the pandemic, I think, was around that time. So I got myself into shape, um, shed a lot of fat, uh, got into fitness. I wasn't too serious about fitness looking back at it now as I am now, but I was definitely on that, trail. I started working at a big law firm that deals with a lot of national product liability for some very, very big companies. Um, when I got my big boy job, they like to say, that corporate law job, I really thought I was on the top of the world, right? But, on paper, I looked real good with my salary, but I wasn't happy. I hated waking up in the morning. I I dreaded maybe 45 minutes to maybe even over an hour every morning trying to get out of the bed. Like I was
Mm,
awake. I just couldn't get my foot up because I didn't want to deal with reality, which was work. And that's all I could do. Work, work. And not now looking back at it in hindsight, I was an asshole to my wife. Um, and I remember one day we were at Disneyland on a vacation, and I had uh, I had advance notice of I was going to be on vacation, so it wasn't a surprise. And my boss at the time knew it, but I still had to take a call and answer a meeting call for our clients at the time. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm in Disneyland, knowing very well I've booked this time out. And I had to get out of line, go back to my hotel room. I mean, if any of you guys know, Disneyland's a pretty big park. Can't just conveniently get out of the park and go to your nearby hotel conveniently. So I had to do that. Probably an hour or so later, I'm suited up for the stupid conference call. And that was just like the rude awakening of how life would be in this environment. I was working till 2, 3 a.m. every morning. There was a long haul of not getting enough rest. Everything I did that was not work felt like a burden. Using the restroom felt like a burden. Cooking felt like a burden. But I felt like I became very conscious of my time and not in a good manner. Like my time was worth more than other people's time, if you get what I'm saying.
sure.
So that's where the billing hours and the traditional big law attorney mindset is at. And you got to be an asshole. You got to be okay with putting everyone second. You're that environment is not suitable for someone who actually likes spending time with their family. That environment is not suitable for someone who wants to have a happy marriage. That environment is not suitable for someone who wants to take a vacation every now and then. you know, so you can't really enjoy the money. You're just a machine, and I didn't like that, and I didn't like that, and I had to take a step back and take on another different job um, that had much better hours. I had more time for my health, my mental health, my family, my personal overall being. And my life was not work. So, I did that for 2 years, 2.5 years, almost 3 years. I was in big law. There's parts I missed about it, like flying Delta nonstop, first class here and there, or Delta Sky Class. Yeah, it was cool, but it was always work at the end of the day. Now I focus a lot on my law firm, as a business owner, and I will say I've had my fair share of working for somebody, um, but I've never wanted to work for somebody forever. That's not in my DNA. Like I said, there's no offense to people out there. There's some people who are good 9 to 5 workers and their employees. They need to be told when to show up to work and all that jazz. That's not me.
Yeah.
That's not
So what
me.
do you currently do today? So you mentioned your law firm, and you kind of started your own law firm to really align with what I'll call that millennial lifestyle, right? Where we're the millennials, older end of the millennials, but nonetheless still millennials, and we know that there's the stigma, the stereotype that millennials are lazy and or we care more about our work life balance, and so what do you currently do today with your law firm?
Yeah, great question. I primarily do family law. And,
Nice. Okay.
yeah.
So would you say that the kind of driver for you diving into the family law was driven by your experience with your mother and your father, or was that something, or did you just kind of fall into it?
Oh, most definitely had a shaping and influence from my mother and my father for sure, for sure. Um, I think that's to me because it hits home. And I mean, let's be real. Who doesn't need a divorce attorney out there based off of the statistics? Or, I just see, I come from a background where I did corporate law and I didn't see any value in it other than to save this billion-dollar company a few dollars. I didn't feel like that was fulfilling to me, right?
Sure.
And and most people can agree to that. But when I helped some guy father, this helpless father who hasn't seen his kids in such a long time, start getting custody for his kids and making a difference that impacts somebody's life. This everyday Joe, heck yeah, I feel important. I changed the dynamic of his life where he can enjoy what means most to him, which is his family. And to me, that's very important thing to be a part of. And that's not a job that, you know, is something to take for granted. It's this is real life people, everyday people that I love helping. Like I can't put a price on it. I truly love my job. When I say that, this isn't about winning a certain amount of cases. It's not about making a certain amount of money. It's literally making a difference. And you can call it social justice reform or whatever. This is not anything political. It's just facts. I love
Yeah.
helping people.
Nice. So, and you moved to the Midwest for law school, and currently live in the Midwest, and you're in Minnesota. And so what is kind of the dynamic of family law today in Minnesota?
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of issues up here with people trying to fight for custody. I think a lot of my clients nowadays, um, they're going through a divorce. There's a lot of out of state removals, meaning you're trying to leave the state of Minnesota with the child to go live in Texas or wherever. Um, so the dynamic is where parents now, it's it's easier for them to file a lawsuit, a custody case that is, to fight for their kids. But I get people who, they don't want to hire an attorney because they think they can work it out amicably with the other parent, and that's great. But sometimes it makes a difference knowing that you have an attorney, because then the other party, the other person, will know that you mean business. Um, and that's the idea, right? I'm there to reconcile as much as I can if it needs to be reconciled. Um, I'm very careful with not promising any particular results because that's liability. I
Sure.
just, I just tell my clients these are our chances, and there's X amount of percentage of chance we get this, and it's a home, it's a home run. But yeah, I'm very, very cautious. Some clients want a guarantee, and it's unethical for me to guarantee you anything. Very rare exceptions I feel comfortable saying that, but even then, I just cover my, what, by saying, there's a 99% chance.
Sure. Sure. So, newer law firm, you've kind of worked in you've kind of worked in the corporate side of things, and you've lived that somewhat. You mentioned Suits a little bit earlier. I actually appreciate that show, because it's a dopamine fix, if you
Yeah.
will, seeing some of these challenges. So you've kind of lived that life to some degree, but have kind of changed your focus to truly be able to live through what I would call your passion now, what would you say is kind of the growth, or what would you say, not is, but um or rather, yeah, is the kind of growth trajectory you're on today as a kind of business owner of your own law firm today, because you've seen the hierarchy side of corporate law. You've seen even today what it takes to be at least a successful lawyer. How are you growing your and I'm not going to give the answer. I kind of want you to tell it, but because I know how you're growing it. But how are you growing how are you growing this how are you growing your law firm, the Onyia law firm?
Well, I'll tell you this, and I appreciate you not disclosing that. uh, you know, just by the way, folks, me and Gil here, we've been very close friends, so he knows some intricate details of how all this plays out. But I will say it's a mindset shift, right? And I won't get too long winded with my answer, but I will give you everything that is relevant to answering this question. Um, One thing I did early on in my career, even when I was working uh, for a company, I think 3 months after I got licensed, not even 3 months, I think 2 months, I opened up a firm, my law firm. And I opened it up as an LLC, still an LLC today. The reason why was I wanted to take clients on the side. Listen, I'm a brand new spanking attorney. I don't know anything from my left to my right, but I took a bet on myself so I could learn how business works and never get too comfortable or dependent on a job to secure my livelihood. Um, a reason I bring that up is because Onyia Law Firm was not grown overnight. I stuck steady to this, right? I can date back 5 years ago. This is when I opened up my law firm. It wasn't busy. It was just here and there. I didn't give up because I knew what my goals were. And my goals were put myself in a position where my law firm isn't a side job, it's my main job. So fast forward about 4 years later, I'm busy. I'm getting busier, and I get really busy uh, because all it takes is energy. When I shifted my mind to, I don't want this to be a side gig, a side hustle. I see this as my main job. And these cases are not something I'm just going to take because I have to take it. I started feeling more comfortable with how I set my price, my presentation, um, my consistency. And I took one or two cases that ended very well for me, and word of mouth here and there. And there's some other things that I don't need to get into. But with all due respect, I know the potential in this profession. I know how clients want to be treated, and that's with respect and with honesty. So when I talk to clients now, it's with a lot of confidence. I don't think people skills is something you can learn. I've always had people skills. That's why I'm still in business and I'm still growing. But I put a 2 year plan 2 years ago on what I want to see in my business. And it's been God's grace. I've surpassed that, uh, that mark. But to answer your question, the business, I see my business as um, my journey, my journey, my journey, a big chapter in my journey. My business is why I went to law school. You know, you got to always have the why. Well, why is that? You want to help people? Yeah. You want to help mothers, dads, stepmoms, whoever, nieces, nephews with custody, whatever, anything family law related. And I do immigration law as well. But, you know, we are on the subject of family law. So that's my primary focus. I don't see how anybody can do that type of schooling, law school to be particular, and be content with being marginalized on their potential. Yes, you know, it's scary to go out and try to do your own thing. Yes, a lot of people rather keep the corporate job. It's squishy and it's guaranteed. You're going to work long hours, but you're going to get your money, and but you'll never feel like you own it. It's something about having that pride that it's mine, right? And it feels so much different when I see what I'm able to do with the hard work and labor from having my own law firm. And quite frankly, I'm not missing out on anything when we compare it to corporate law. Not a damn thing. I wish I could say, oh, well, this is you know, honestly, but you have to take that risk. And if you don't take that risk, you never know, you know, and it's like any millionaire, billionaire entrepreneur out there, business owner, they'll tell you, you know, it was scary. I had to start from here. And, you know, granted, I had the luxury of having a day job while I built my business, but I did that because I knew that day job wasn't going to be a forever thing. I had it as I'm going to up you and leverage myself because at the end of the day, all I can do is take care of myself and my family. That's why I always kept my business open. I had job offers that told me, oh, yeah, no, shut down your business. And Gilbert, one thing I would say is that's not happening. Well, if you're going to work here, you can't have. I said, that's not happening. If I'm guaranteeing you that I'm going to dedicate time, 40 hours a week, whatever it is, to your job, why do you care that I have a side job? Well, because it's a practice of law. And so, again, you got to know why you went to law school. If it's something that you think is, you know, a financial burden, and you think that all you're ever good at is to work for somebody, you might not want to do law school, you know. Um, but I feel like a lot of people go into law school because they want their own office. They want to make their own calls. They want to be able to dictate when they can go on vacation with their families. You know, I have that same regimen. That's why I invested in myself early on. I didn't wait 10 years down the road to open up a firm. I
Yeah.
already built that business acumen. So at this point in my juncture, I'm transitioning to setting up a, a downtown shop in the near future, hiring more employees, like, you know, and that's the thing, you know. So I had to grind and know that it's not forever, but still, you know, you're going to have those times too where you're like, oh my gosh, why did I do this? You just got to put yourself in a position of not being comfortable in order to be comfortable.
Sure. And it's interesting that you brought up the concept and kind of thought of entrepreneurs, right? And even when we look at, you know, kind of some of the big businesses today, right? Like I think about, you know, what Mark Zuckerberg did or Elon Musk, and a lot of people say Elon Musk stole Tesla, whatever. Bill Gates, you know, Jeff Bezos, they all kind of had a smaller vision to whether it was solve a problem or kind of, you know, I always go back to Amazon, and I remember even in undergrad, Amazon was just selling books. It was, you know, it was just books. And now it's a little more. And there's a kid I watch on TikTok a lot, and he's grown his I think it's called School of Hard Knocks is his channel, and he talks to he stops a lot of millionaires, billionaires, goes to the right areas to hold these interviews, and he always asks for just a couple minutes and some advice on how to get started and so on. And you hear that a lot. You hear that,
Yeah.
hey, I took a risk, or I was a doctor, or I was whatever, and I took this risk to do my own thing. And I think, as you mentioned it, even in the world of, because you had mentioned that there's this kind of stereotype of what a lawyer is or can be because of the entertainment side of it, and that's not necessarily reality. But from a business perspective, you're still creating, or at least from that kind of professional fiduciary kind of world, you're still creating a business or have the ability to create a business and be and truly be successful, as long as you still take that risk, because you still have to take that risk. I think that and that's business as a whole. um to be able to do anything with a business, you have to take that risk, because it's never going to just come to you. Even if you have a grand idea, you're going to have to take some investment, um which oftentimes that investment is risk, whether it's monetarily or, hey, you're gonna start a company. Well, guess what? You need to invest either time or money, right? You got to invest something in it. And usually that's the world of risk in and of itself. You don't know exactly how things are going to land, but as long as and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, you trust yourself and trust kind of your skills. And I think it's probably a little different for somebody with a specialized background like an attorney. um there's even, my mind goes to even myself having a doctorate, and how do I take my knowledge, right, and my skills of research and being able to look at things objectively and try to find an empirical answer, by way of research. You take those skills and apply them, but you still have to acknowledge that there's going to be a risk. But as long as you trust in yourself, trust in your knowledge, your expertise, your skills, whatever that is, you're going to have the ability to potentially come out on the upside of that risk.
Yeah, no, that's without a doubt. I think I mean I think law school is good to just get your place in the door and network, really. But law school didn't teach you how to run a law firm. Didn't teach you about anything about a business. And when I did clerk at law firms as a law student, and even after law school, uh, I would ask certain questions that I thought, the partners, people who owned the firm, uh, would be able to answer me. And I promise you, they had like a deer in a headlight look when I would ask them certain business expenses and questions that, to the point, I think one partner told me, "Why are you asking me this question? Like, what are you trying to figure out? What do you?" And I just looked at her and I said, "I'm just curious how law firms are ran." So that in its own told me she, as a partner, don't even know. And also, two, they are not there to teach you how to run the business aspect of
Yeah.
the firm. They're there just to work. And a lot of lawyers aren't really good um, at business marketing, funny enough, right? Um, this is a very mom and pop type field. The only reason why I say that, because even if you look at the biggest law firms in the country, I think like Kirkland and Ellis, I think they're out in Chicago. At least that's their headquarters. uh, you still have people at the very top, the shareholders and the partners, the managing partners, as running the show, calling the shots, and who's going to get the job as a first year associate, or who's going to make partner after 10 years of being there, or 15 years of being there. You don't really see that in other fields like the medical field, right? Because it's heavily regulated by state and federal policies. So your general hospital, um, yes, there's owners there sometimes and there's board members, but the top surgeon isn't the one calling the shots on, okay, this is who's going to come in and this is who's going to make, surgeon of the division, because there's not so much nitpicky uh, curtain talk, right? So again, what I'm trying to get at is you have to look after yourself at the end of the day, especially in a intense environment like the law. Um, you do have to bet on yourself, like you were saying. I think a lot of things are easy for people to just be complacent with. I'm not, because I know there's so much out there that can be, experienced, right? And again, it's all about what type of life you want. And a lot of people, they have that lifestyle envisioned before they go into law school, hence why they're applying to law school. But somewhere down the road, they get a rude awakening and they're just okay with it. And I never understood that. I can count on my finger how many of my colleagues from law school have their own firm. Okay. And out of those few individuals, they're all doing very well. The reason why is because not just the mindset, but they understand the game. That person you're working for isn't no smarter than you. In fact, I learned in some of these big law firms, the smartest attorney is not the richest one there. The managing partner, the one that gets all the book of business, they just got really good people skills. And I've seen first year associates and even some seasoned paralegals know more about the situation than they do. Not saying that they're dumb. I'm just saying that, again, it goes like this. The people who graduated top of their class, I don't know what it is, but they make out to be very good employees coming out of law school, right? Um, and then the people that graduate kind of middle, they're going to be somewhat good business owners or maybe even great owners. Then people who graduate closer to the bottom, there's something different. They think outside the box. They become
something. Go ahead. Go ahead.
no.
This
I
thought
was going to say they become very excellent attorneys. It just tells you how much law school does not positively correlate with how you're going to be successful as an attorney, because it's two different animals. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So what's interesting is one of my one of the mentors that I speak with every month. He has his PhD in mechanical engineering, and I've mentioned him on a couple previous episodes. His name is Bill Bellows, and he has focused on Dr. W. Edwards Deming quite a bit, and Deming holds a concept and framework and kind of we'll call it a framework called the red bead experiment, and the whole goal is to like eliminate red bead. And I'm certain all the listeners are probably tired of me talking about Deming, but guess what? That's where a lot of my research lived with my doctorate. So he's always going to be referenced at least some degree in each episode, but nonetheless, um, Bill actually used that kind of Red Beat experiment to talk about the top and bottom of the class, and he used med school as an example, but the whole premise behind the red bead experiment is to eliminate red beads. So you dip in and you dip this paddle in and you're pulling up beads, and the whole goal is to eliminate defects. But that same kind of framework in theory can be attributed to quality as a whole, which aligns with the purpose of eliminating defects. And even if in a perfect world you eliminate all the defects in manufacturing and producing of services, whatever that is, and that could be the world of customer complaints. Even if you got rid of all the defects and you had, you know, 50 white beads, and we say, hey, all of these are thumbs up, and you kind of reference that with the same concept of like a graduating class of attorneys and or even doctors, you're still going to have the top and bottom of the class. Everybody's going to be a doctor, right? Everybody, let's say everybody is a white bead, they all graduate, but there's still a performance difference between the top and the bottom because they graduated at the top or the bottom of the class, but ultimately they're still doctors. They're just all going to perform differently, right? And I think that's the same kind of thing in the world of law, even just from talking with you here, simply because, as you mentioned, there's some people who are going to be great employees. They're gonna get the billable hours. They're gonna have a large portfolio of clients that are bringing in a whole bunch of revenue. They're going to get paid very well. But on the bottom, you may have those people or those students who graduate, and even though they're not the top of the class and they're not working with big name clients like GoPro. I once met a guy who was a lead counsel for GoPro, and he went to a really prestigious law school and so on. And you mentioned a little bit earlier some of the politics behind it. You even see it in the show Suits, right? The the law firm in Suits, everybody had to go to Harvard, and that was just like one
Right.
of the biggest things. But interestingly, you're still an attorney, right? And it's how do you take, whether you scored top of the class, bottom of the class, whatever, you're still an attorney, and you meet the minimum requirements. And granted, you have a little bit of a different world in law because, as opposed to like a doctorate or a PhD, when you're done, you're done. Sure, your dissertation or your thesis can get kind of knighted as, top dissertation of the year, whatever that is. You all have to pass the bar, but when you're done, right? When you pass that bar, you're licensed, and as long as you maintain that kind of ethical world and maintain some of those continuing education credits and all that other stuff, you're doing what you need to do. And I say all this because it's interesting how in the world of kind of business and everything else, it all still aligns to some degree of kind of this world of I guess landing where you're supposed to land, and wherever you land, make the most of it and do great with it, right? Ultimately do great with it. And obviously that's the difference between, because I've seen, you can see people who, like for me, I didn't do great in undergrad, and obviously that I as well, I'm going to make it very obvious, I didn't really care about school. I was always good at school, but when I got to college, it was all about sports. It was track and then football, and I didn't really care and think long term of, oh, this is going to affect, hey, a 2.4 your first couple of years in school and undergrad is going
Yeah.
to impact the final 2 years, final 3 years, for most athletes. And now we know that with NIL and all that other stuff, we know that people are, student athletes are staying in school for 6, 7, 8 years. Um, but all of that impacts your likelihood of being accepted into a reputable law school, or at least one of those law schools that has that large law library and so on. But um, I think about that if I were to go to law school today, I could probably focus better, right? I'm a little more mature and be able to run circles around a lot of people that are and graduate. Let's say I graduate, pass the bar, all that. I'm certain with confidence that I could probably run circles around some of those people who graduated at the top of their class. But I think a lot of that comes with maturity, and because it correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of law schools or a lot of people who go to law school actually go in their late 20s to 30s, right? Like I feel like that stat is. I'm gonna
Oh
look it
yeah.
up.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I'm the oldest person in my law class was a 72-year-old man. He was a real estate broker throughout his career. He was a veteran of the army, I believe, and he had that one thing on his bucket list ever since he was young to be a lawyer. Sure enough, he showed up, and he did run laps around some of our professors because of his age difference, right? He
Yeah,
was older than our professors, so he did make comments here and there that were actually interesting. He's in Montana now. He's practicing law there. God bless his soul. I hope he's still alive. But it's been a few years since I spoke to him. But yeah, a lot of us were older. Some of us was coming straight out of undergrad. I think for myself, I had like a 8-month gap between undergrad and law school. So I didn't really, can't say I really had like life skills in my belt. Um, I was a nurse assistant. I worked hospice care prior to law school. Did that throughout my undergrad. But as far as like life skills that you and I would have now, didn't really have that. I did have a family at the time, but I think a lot of us were a little bit older. I did have a lot of classmates that were in their 30s. Um, some already had kids. Some, I think, the class ahead of me, there's a couple of 50-year-olds, 40-year-olds in there. Some seasoned paralegals that were tired of being a paralegal and wanted to go to law school and become a lawyer. Um, so yeah, you get that more non-traditional demographic in law school compared to like something like med school.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
I just looked it up. It says that the average age of someone entering law school in the U.S. is typically around 24 to 26 years old, with 25% of individuals entering law school are in their or above the age of 30. So it's pretty cool.
yeah, interesting. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I went in when I was 25, um, very young at the time, thinking about it. Um, but yeah, I mean, if you ask me would I do it again, I would. Uh, I would do it again, but knowing what I know now, I wouldn't have put so much emphasis on certain things like, oh, I got to get top grades. I got to do this. I would have just been really smart in the way of let me just get by. Let me go ahead and network here, not wait till my third year of law school to network. Let me get more mentorship from people who own their own practice and know what the hell they're doing and not just a partner at a firm. And I don't have anything against that. I've seen it with my own eyes. When the firm gets too big, you have something called service partners. They're not bringing in any money. They don't have their own book of business. They don't have their own clients. If they left tomorrow, it wouldn't change anything with the dynamic and the financial aspect of the law firm. They're just made partner because they've been there for so long and somebody voted them in. Politics. When you're a managing partner in this field, in this profession, you leave, your clients tend to leave with you. They're just paying the firm that you work at. They are not married to the firm, they're married to you. So I learned that real quick. And I knew then if I left somewhere, I'd be going with the book of business. So, I mean, I've I laugh now because there was a time I felt like I needed to work for somebody, and um just and it's good. You got to get the experience, but now I'm looking for people that I can hire, right? And I only laugh because you don't know what you know until you're going to put yourself in that position. Um, so for law school, if you want a certain type of lifestyle that you can manage and you can be content with, you have to re-examine your purpose of going to law school. If you're just doing it thinking that it's rainbows and unicorns, you shouldn't do it. There's some much easier professions to get into that are going to be less stressful, that are going to be better on your health, and you can make just as much or even more. But if you're willing to grind, you're willing to commit, you're willing to be under pressure, the type of pressure I'm talking about is the unknown type of pressure, if you know what I mean. And still be at your wits and be able to be flexible and dynamic with your time. Like that's a skill of its own, and it's not to be took for granted. So that's what I say, because there's so much out there um, to do, and there's so many jobs that I would say if I had to talk to incoming graduate out of law school, my advice would be, look, apply to as many places you want. You might not do the area of law you want to practice right away, but that doesn't matter. Skills can be translated and transitioned to other jobs, but never feel like you have to be bounded to someone. And I get it. There's bills, there's student loans, there's life just comes. But don't tell me you're going to do 7 years of postgraduate education and have a doctorate behind your name and feel like you have to be bound to someone. That doesn't make any sense to me. What's the point of education? What's the point of going to college? What's the point of going into law school? What's the point of working your butt off? I don't know if we can curse on this podcast. So
Yeah, no, you're good. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know what's the point of all of that to still have to feel like you're obligated and confined to answer to someone. Don't get me wrong, you have a boss, you need to have that respect. But where you have to answer to someone as if you still work at McDonald's or Walmart. And no offense to those jobs, but we're talking about somebody sacrificing themselves to go further into their education. So again, I see it even, with 10-year associates who've been practicing for 10 years or so. They're still like very, very shy to address their needs, right? Maternal leave, paternal leave. These are real things, right? And lawyers have to juggle just like a lot of demanding jobs, becoming a parent and all. I didn't have to worry about that because I got that oddly enough in the unorthodox fashion. I did that all in law school. So I was already like getting all those weeds out that are a struggle now for a lot of my colleagues who are now having families. And they're thinking, oh, I might have to quit my job because my job's already demanding enough. How do I balance that with a family, two little ones, three little ones? And, I didn't worry about that. I did it in a time that wasn't ideal, but I don't regret that at all. So I don't regret anything. Only thing I could say is, network better and just not really give too much about grades, and just remember like everyone's faking it till they make it. The ones that are really understand what it's about, um, You can tell they didn't stress out the way some other people did. But yeah, it's a life changing course um, that till this day I'm like, wow, we came from there.
Nice. Nice. All right, man. Well, Sly, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Definitely gonna bring you in here in a few more weeks. Try to do another episode with you, but it's been a pleasure spending some time with you and kind of really getting to learn a little bit about kind of some of the considerations of law school, right? And growing yourself as an individual in the world of law, because often, again, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, there's this stereotype and there's this kind of fictitious world that the media portrays on an attorney, on a lawyer, on the business of law, because ultimately it still is a business. I think it was a pleasure hearing from you, and really someone, and I think that's one of the biggest things that I would hope a lot of the listeners grasp is what it truly is like, and rather, what are some of the considerations when you think about law school? Because it's, even with a doctorate, right? Some of those things you need to consider is it's not gonna, you're not gonna finish and then come out making millions of dollars. And similar to when you finish undergrad, you you think, oh, I got a degree, I'm gonna go out here and get a big boy job, and then you end up at this kind of entry level that's equivalent, with a salary that's equivalent to what some people are making hourly at a grocery store, for example. But hey, you have that paper, right? But I think it's important as you kind of go beyond that undergrad world, and if you choose a specialized profession like law, like medical school, like a PhD, um, you kind of think about the time and commitment that you have to put in, and then go in, I guess, a little more open minded and not think that what you see on TV, what you hear on TV is Bible, is the truth of what everything really should be. So definitely appreciate you jumping on with us.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It was my pleasure, and thank you so much for having me on here. And you know, I'd love to get back on here soon, and chit chat about life and just a little bit of what makes us who we are. Right? We're both professionals. We both went through undergrad and our postgraduate schooling, and you're a doctor yourself, so you understand that a lot of these things are not just commitment but sacrifice on our families, on
Yeah.
our loved ones, our spouses, and so there's a lot that goes into making something special. Now, I appreciate you having me on here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if anybody wanted to reach out to you, I know you're practicing law in Minnesota, but if anyone in Minnesota happens to be listening, if they needed a family law attorney, how can they
Yes.
reach you?
Yeah, they can reach me on my website. Just before I even give that away, I practice in Minnesota, North Dakota, and I am going to be licensed in Illinois very soon. So I'm going to be hitting the Chicago market hopefully by the end of this year. The reason why I say very soon, these things take some time. But they can reach me at anyone who's interested in family law or even immigration, which I can do in any state since it's federal. You reach me at onyalawfirm.com. Okay. That's ONYIA lawfirm.com. You can shoot a message there. An inquiry, it's free. Consultations free for the first 10 to 15 minutes. And then we can go further about my email address is sly@onyalawfirm.com. That's SLY at ONYIA lawfirm.com. It's been a pleasure being on your show.
Yeah, thanks for spending the time. All right, everybody. Well, this has been the fifth episode on the coldest side of the pillow. We'll do it again here pretty soon. Thanks for spending the time with us, Sly. Again, it's always a pleasure. Obviously, I'll be reaching out to you here later since we text each other almost every day. So, with that, everybody, we'll let you go. And again, this has been the coldest side of the pillow, where we like to talk about anything and everything. Today happened to be a little bit about law. Talk to you later.